Hi, this is Greg Walker. I'm the research director at CABA. I'd just like to welcome everyone to the session today on future hospitality and entertainment facilities. It's a new direction for the environmental sustainability and changed human behavior. Um, I'll talk to you just briefly about myself and about CABA. CABA is an international not-for-profit trade association focusing on connected homes and intelligent buildings in the entire built environment. And we have a news brief that goes out to around 19,000 subscribers every Thursday. And we do a lot of initiatives with the council meetings, and we do a lot of research projects on white papers in the connected home space and the intelligent building space, and larger scale research projects that we work with our research firm members on. And a lot of those have to do with sustainability, and sustainability is definitely a key focus to a lot of our membership. So I'll be acting really as the moderator for today's session. For today's session, we have Mila as the vice president of the U.S. Green Buildings Council, and then we have Vicky, who's the founder of Earth Changers, and then we have Jonathan, who is the risk director at Moto Hospitality. I'll give a brief introduction of each one of the panelists, and then pass it off to the panelists to give a pitch and their take on the environmental sustainability going forward. So with Mili, has been managing director of the Green Business Certification Institute in India, and is the vice president of the US GBC, which is the US Green Buildings Council. She's responsible for the technical adoption and customization for a portfolio of rating systems for GBCI for the Asia Pacific region. She's a project lead on several projects, from lead for cities and communities, lead for residential, peer, and is involved in sustainability projects for buildings, cities, and communities. She's been a graduate in architecture degree and a specialist in building technologies, and she's in the 2.5 decades of experience in energy, green buildings, climate-resistant housing, city planning, urban transportation, environment, and a focus on sustainable development and habitat. Next, we have Vicky Smith. He started into tourism in the mid-90s and sustainable tourism since the mid-2000s in destinations, marketing, and e-commerce. She heads a broad and online on major UK tour operators such as Virgin Holidays, online travel agents and media, package and specialist holidays, ski and tours, and charity challenges, volunteer tourism, NGOs, sustainable tourism accreditation organizations. And she's a qualified ranger in Africa and acclaimed academic with published her master's thesis on online marketing and greenwashing in volunteer tourism. In 2019, she was invited to be the ambassador for the UK government Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Year of Green Action, and she's the trustee board for a charity, Seed Madagascar, that helps the development team for global and European ecotourism networks. She leads a startup called Earth Changers, which is life-changing places, world-changing people, extraordinary experiences that provide a positive impact that's transformational and sustainable tourism around the world, and is rated one of the best responsible travel and tourism websites in 2019. Next, we have Jonathan from Moto Hospitality. He's an environmental health practitioner and specializes in organizational risk management, business resilience and insurance, health and safety, food hygiene and safety, fire safety, environmental compliance, environmental social governance and responsibility. And he has excellent communication skills, work ethic, and passion to improve people's lives and to give back. He was a regulator for several years before joining commercial hospitality business in the UK, firstly in leisure via the Cinema Group, and now in hospitality via Moto. Moto is UK's largest motorway service area business and has 60 locations and serves 120 million customers every year. It has brands like BK, KFC, Marks and Spencer's, Simply Foods, Craig's, Costa Coffee, and others. So with that, I'll pass it off to each one of the panelists to say a few words about themselves, and then we'll get off into some questions, and then even open it up to the floor for the audience to ask questions as well. So I'll start with Mili to say a few words about yourself.
So hi, this is Mili Majumdar, and as communicated by Greg, I am a Senior Vice President with the US Green Building Council. And the US Green Building Council is primarily recognized and known for the LEED program, the LEED Green Building Rating System that applies to buildings, communities, and cities. And it is applicable in about 168 countries. So we have a very large global footprint of sustainable buildings that we have been able to steer through the LEED program. And in my responsibility as a technical development lead for multiple programs, I oversee the program development and implementation of these rating systems globally. So with this, since we are today discussing about sustainable tourism, so I just wanted to say a few things that we have been able to steer through the LEED program. But at the outset, it's important for me to reiterate that hospitality is one of the major economic drivers in the globe, and of course it has also a major footprint on the environment. And we also see that tourism sector is many of the tourist facilities are located in places where there is a fragile ecosystem, which means that there is a lot of pressure on the ecosystem, the natural resources, and water, energy, and also very importantly, the amount of waste that is generated from the tourism sector is also a huge kind of burden on the ecosystem as a whole. So sustainability is not a fancy word, I think, for the tourism and hospitality sector. It is a must do. And it is something which will save cost, and it will definitely, be a very, very key component of impacting the triple bottom line. So very importantly, through the LEED program, and we have several hospitality sector, and major chains of hotels that go with the certification. And of late, we have been seeing that there is an increased number of the tourism facility that are opting for net zero facility, which means that not only they are reducing the consumption, but also trying to do maximum recycling, reuse, regeneration of all the resources, so that the footprint on the on where they are getting set up is minimal. So I think it's very, very critical for the hospitality sector. And maybe when we come back again for second round, we should discuss specifically on the situation that all of us are faced with right now in the post-COVID world. How as the sectors are opening up, what kind of measures we need to take to make the the hospitality sector, the hotels, and other tourism facilities gear up to the new opening. So I'll take a pause here and would like to hear from my other co-panelists.
Yeah, well, we'll go with Vicky next.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Mili. So yeah, as Greg said, I have a startup called Earth Changers, which is a curated collection of positive impact tourism. It's sustainable tourism, it's regenerative, and really what we try to do with consumers is help them find and book trips that will truly change the world. So we promote tourism, both accommodations and local tour companies who have demonstrable evidence of the positive impact of their tourism operations. for example, communities and conservation. So, you know, in what I deal with, it's almost no longer good enough to minimize negative impacts such as energy, water, waste. And it's very much focusing on the positive impacts and how that contributes to what I would call tourism for sustainable development. So tourism that helps the UN SDGs. You know, my background in tourism, as Greg said, started actually because of a love of nature. I was a skier. I also spoke French. I'd done a French degree, and I started working in tourism in the French Alps, and really knew local communities and local tourism almost there. So I knew sort of skis in the winter and lakes and mountains, holidays, vacations in the summer. And through that route, that took me into tourism as a career and into jobs in marketing, and in the late 90s, tech and e-commerce and web development. So it's still quite early days for those sorts of jobs even then. But the interesting thing with that was the only jobs available were in the mainstream market. And so it took me out of the kind of nature-based tourism that I'd worked in previously into very much what we call in the UK package holiday market. So very much the kind of industrial, almost sort of conveyor belt model of tourism that we now have. And it was really through that I had this kind of penny drop moment of the differences between tourism as an industry, which is quite exploitative actually, and the tourism that I preferred, which came to become known as responsible tourism, I suppose, which had a focus on the host communities and improving the situation for them. And so tourism, in my view, has become this huge, huge industry, which is really not serving the people and destinations that it was built on or is built on. And in actual fact, isn't supporting inequalities, isn't supporting health, and is actually being almost quite abusive of environments, of social structures, and even economically. You know, a lot of tourism results in leakage, so even economically the destinations don't benefit. So, you know, when I started my responsible tourism journey, it was very much really about the sort of minimizing the negatives. I worked, as you said, Greg, in volunteer tourism and in charity challenges, and I worked in conservation as a ranger. And through that process, I found that the platforms that existed promoting responsible tourism, a lot of them had to dilute the level of sustainability in order to be viable. And that's because there wasn't a consumer public which appeared to be interested in sustainability. They had to continue as a business. And so my ethics with, I suppose, Earth Changers is to not do that, is to retain a really top level standard of sustainability, and to promote to consumers these amazing places who do incredible work for their local destinations and local communities. And by promoting to consumers, we also have a great audience, which is the trade audience that follow us because they're learning too. We also have great following from educational establishments because equally students are learning. It's very popular with sort of younger people, certainly sort of millennials, Gen Z downwards. And, you know, I think we are representative, I suppose, of changing values, that sustainability is no longer, it's not just about environmental sustainability, it's very much about the social impacts, and it's very much about sort of holistic values changing. And part of that is because we're technically able to, part of that is things like the UN SDGs, which have supported that process. Part of it is we're learning as we go. Sustainability is a journey. No one's perfect, and people are learning more and more and improving more and more. There's been a huge rise, we'll talk about it in a bit, in interest in sustainability due to COVID, both from the trade and from consumers. And I think what we might see as a result is more greenwashing actually comes out. So at Earth Changers, we very much focus on demonstrable proven impacts, and that's by people measuring and monitoring and the commitment they have to sustainability. So yeah, that's kind of me really.
Thanks, Vicky. Jonathan?
Thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Vicky, for that, a great overview, and Mili as well. So yeah, hi, my name is Jonathan Hayes. I'm a chartered environmental health practitioner in the UK, a regulator by background, so worked in enforcing the law around environmental compliance and food and health and safety in the UK. moved into corporate worlds, as Greg alluded to in the introduction. I think we're on the edge of a moment, really. I think in terms of hospitality, travel, and I think you could say, probably retail as well. Retail are probably a few steps ahead, but certainly on the hospitality and the tourism travel sector, where both those sectors are really hurting at the moment. Certainly, in the UK, but I suspect also across the US and the other jurisdictions that are on this call today. On the back of national government restrictions and lockdowns and travel bans and red listing, amber listing, green listing, various listings that certainly in the UK have become part of the day-to-day parlance of where you can and can't travel to at the moment, as restrictions seem to change on an almost daily basis. As Vicky will know, I guess, I don't know whether any of her destinations are in Portugal, but you only have to look at the UK press to see the scrabble to get back from Portugal in the last 24 hours before it hit the UK amber list, which doesn't do anything for sustainability. The sectors have got some challenges to address. As Vicky alluded to, the Gen Zs are more awake to companies' ESG, environmental, social, and governance footprints, and looking for companies that do their bit. And I think that there's a danger that that we accept that we go to net zero, but net zero is going to be the new normal by the end of the year. We're going to have the 2021 climate change conference in Glasgow later this year in the UK. Every company that I can think of is announcing net zero initiatives, but we need to be looking probably towards net positive, so that companies take the step beyond being purely net zero in terms of carbon, single-use plastics, travel, purchasing, and behaviours, and look at how they give back and have a smaller footprint than the footprint they create across their communities. So their footprint is bigger than their consumption in some ways, and you look at the community activities that go on around companies, and certainly our chief exec is a great advocate that when you're in a position of leadership and responsibility and you should give back and make a difference to your communities, and that's certainly an ethos that we are working to within Moto. So I think I'll leave it there, Greg, and we'll move on to the questions and the discussion.
Right. Thanks, Jonathan, and the other panelists. I guess I'll start off with really that was touched upon with all the panelists in the introduction, and really the elephant in the room would be like, with COVID-19, what do you see the impacts of COVID-19 right now, and even in future impacts of COVID on your particular sector? And then I guess a follow-up question of that would be, what specific recommendations would you and your sector do you feel you should be doing to address these impacts? So I'll just open it up to all three panelists to get their take.
Yes, thanks, Greg, and thanks, Vicky and Jonathan, for sharing, your perspectives on this particular sector. So I think for the hospitality sector, and the other one complementing is the aviation. So these are possibly the two worst hit sectors because of COVID-19. So it will be critical to bring back the economy, on track, and particularly for the regions where it is the economy thrives on tourism. There are so many countries and tourism destinations that only thrive, the livelihoods thrive on the tourism. So on one hand, we have this huge pressure on the economy being revived, and we also have to ensure sustainability. We also have to ensure operations being sustainable. We also have to ensure that places, when they open up, they're safe for tourists to travel to. So if we look at it from that perspective, I think sustainability is something that can, again, I'll come back to that point, that it will certainly help to save the costs. If you're doing things properly, then the operational costs come down significantly. If the from the design stage as well as implementation stage, if systems are planned and designed in a way that it is sustainable and efficient. So that is point number one. Second is, since many of these facilities have been closed down, so there is a very high chance that particularly things like say water systems, the indoor environment, because the air conditioning system has been shut down maybe for several months. So there is a very chance of the indoor environmental quality being impacted, and maybe the water system, etc. Also the quality is suffering, as well as the other impacts may have happened because of the close down. So very crucial would be recommissioning. I mean, technically, I think recommissioning of systems will be one of the crucial things before we open up and provide a safe place for the visitors, because we also know that the viral activities as well as the other indoor air pollutants can have a significant impact on human health and well-being. So, but then there are, also contradictory things that can happen. For example, if I give you a small example, suppose if you disinfect a place, right? So we will be using a different kind of, disinfectants, which also have a significant amount of, say, volatile organic compounds within it, and which have a serious impact on human health. So while we are opening up, I think these things are very, very critical on disinfection, on, decommissioning, and how we can do it, not only keeping the sustainability aspect, but also the health and well-being aspect. Then the other critical thing, there has been a lot of research to show that optimum humidity is very, very important to keep the pollutant load indoor under control. And bacteria, virus, virus, of course, is an inanimate thing. It does not have life unless it gets into your body. But generally, indoor pollutants have a large tendency of breeding in places where the humidity is not controlled well. So I think while recommissioning, one has to play special importance to the air conditioning system, and particularly in coastal climates where humidity is a main challenge. So that is one important thing. And also I feel, in addition to sustainability and health and well-being aspect, one should pay a lot of importance on resilience. We have seen that in these difficult times, how suddenly we were caught unaware and we faced so much of challenges, and particularly the vulnerable population got hit. So, I think one of the aspect of responsible tourism is also you build resilience not only for your own immediate, surroundings, but also the livelihood and the community which is particularly, based on your resources. Suppose if my hotel is certainly shut down and the people who are dependent on that facility, they will suddenly go without pay. So how do you kind of have a resilient community with alternative, livelihood, etc. in place? So there is a whole discussion, I think, that should generate around resilience. So these are my few, key things and observations I think the tourism sector should address. And I would also like to hear views from Vicky and Jonathan on this.
Hi, happy to go ahead, Mili. I agree with you on resilience. What's very interesting in my world is, I talk to tourist boards quite a lot. I actually had a trade show today. Obviously, I'm in the UK, so I'm towards the end of the day. So I've met about 20 tourist boards today. And the difference in their interest in sustainability in even just a year is phenomenal. And that's because of COVID, I think. Very much COVID has challenged resilience of destinations, and they are understanding that actually what they have to do for resilience is actually what they have to do for sustainability. Of course, they're not that different in terms of the meaning. It means they can continue their tourism without negative impact, hopefully creating a positive impact. So I think it's definitely, from a destination standpoint, massive interest in resilience and being able to continue, and therefore an increased interest in what they have to do to be sustainable destinations and the measures they have to take. From a consumer standpoint, what's been very interesting in the last year is sustainable tourism, I think previously was very much seen by some as a bit of a hygiene factor. It's kind of, you know, almost seen as a bit of a niche, necessary, but we don't really want to know about it. And I think that's where consumers think energy, water, waste, you know, it's details they don't necessarily need to know, but they really want to presume someone else is actually looking after those issues. What's happened with COVID, where consumers historically sort of the demand was motivated by price, by weather, by the destination itself to some extent, COVID's really changed that. Because first and foremost, we can't just go where we want to go. We have to go to certain destinations we're allowed to go, certainly in the UK, as Jonathan noted at the moment. But you know, one of the primary concerns now by consumers is health and safety, and it is, you know, for example, hotels or cities having those health and safety procedures in place and protocols in place. One of the other main sort of drivers now of booking is the flexibility of booking. That really, you know, hasn't been such an issue in the past. And then the third kind of big change for consumer interest is, again, sustainability. So we've got these kind of three issues which have become top of the list, which are their sort of primary motivations for choosing places, which is health and safety, flexibility, or in other words, are they a responsible business who will give me my money back if I need to have it or change my booking, and sustainability. And that's completely different to a year ago. Now, obviously, once everything opens up post-COVID, we might see those things dissipate. But I suspect from the, you know, we've all been through a global trauma this year, that's not going to be forgotten easily. And I suspect some of those measures which companies have had to put in place, such as more flexible booking arrangements, they're probably here to stay, and they're probably really going to change the face of the industry. And then, you know, other things that we see, certainly here in the UK, because the tourism sector hasn't been specifically supported financially by the government, even though it was made illegal for a while. We see a lot of people who've maybe closed businesses. They were able to take out loans, for example, to survive, but they realized, hang on a minute, if I do that, I'm going to be paying it back for the rest of my career. And they've chosen not to continue, or they might do so later on. So I think we'll see the supply side of the industry contracting to a certain extent. So that change in supply and the way they work, combined with the change in interest of demand, I think we'll see quite a different tourism industry as a result of this. Jonathan.
Thanks, Vicky and Mili. Some great points so far. I think the impact on the sector, you know, particularly in the UK, and I can only speak for the UK, you know, was immense in terms of hospitality and tourism. You know, pretty much it collapsed overnight the day that the UK went into the first national lockdown back in April or March or April last year. I can't remember the date now. It was ingrained in my mind for a while. So that had huge financial
March the 23rd
impact.
Last year.
There we go.
Okay.
Vicky's got it on tap there. And you know, and we saw our revenue drop by 90% overnight. You know, as a transport business, all our brand partners basically shut themselves down, and we still had to provide some things for travellers because we're legally obliged to in the UK. So I think what that's led on to, as both Mili and Vicky have alluded to, is a changing consumer expectation and demand. And our early research last year, certainly around our sector, sort of highlighted three things that customers were looking for from us and hospitality. One was safety, one is space, and the third is speed. And I think, you know, if you unpick those, safety, you know, Mili's touched on it. The importance of ventilation, you know, cannot be underestimated in normal times, but highlight that, you know, the coronavirus challenges just made that more apparent. The non-contact, you know, in terms of surfaces and accessing things like toilets has become more and more important to people, as has avoiding locations where you might make hand contact with other people. Space, you know, certainly in the UK, we've had fairly tight controls around the space you're allowed to occupy and how many people you can have in buildings, and that that has had a knock-on impact and effects on people's behaviour, even as some of those measures have been relaxed. Some people are comfortable in crowds, some have become less confident in crowds. And speed, we've seen a huge demand for people wanting to have a quick experience, to be able to transact online using apps, using phones, without talking to somebody in many cases, and without having to have contact with people, and to get in and get out of a place quickly. And certainly that, tourism has a challenge there. Just I think about the hotel checking in process in many hotels seems to take an inordinate length of time, and I don't know, what it's like in other parts of the world, but certainly watching the queues of people trying to get in and out of airports in the UK seems to, speed and social distancing and ventilation all seem to have got out the window in many cases and been overlooked. And I think, you both touched on resilience, Mili and Vicky, and I think it brings us on to an important debate that I don't think we've really had in the UK yet. And I don't know whether, Greg, you've had it in Canada or Mili in India, but where we draw our risk tolerance and risk acceptance in terms of coronavirus, what level of infections are we prepared to tolerate as a society, and potentially then what level of death is acceptable or not acceptable, and the same with vaccinations. And the key to in my mind to unlocking tourism, and Vicky will know better than me, is clearly going to be vaccinations and the ability to vaccinate the traveller, but also the travelling population, but also I guess the destination population, so we don't get geographical international spread of more variants of coronavirus continuing ad infinitum, without agreeing, I guess, as a world, what the acceptable level of risk is for different travellers and sectors.
Yeah, I think, Jonathan, there's some interesting sort of things, initiatives being mooted, whereby, instead of buying a trip for a trip type thing, instead of offering a charitable donation to a local person to have a trip as well as you going there, we're starting to see travel companies talk about how they can contribute to vaccines in the destination, because people have become much more aware of, wanting to support communities actually, and they also want their holidays. So really, what it is they don't really want to compromise their own experience, but if it means they can contribute to helping the people in the destination they're going to, then they want to do that. And can they help that with vaccines? If that means they can hurry up their trip, that they don't want to postpone any longer, basically.
So on this note, there was a very, interesting advertisement by a key hotel chain in India, but then they faced a regulatory flag and had to pull it down. So India has been facing a serious vaccine shortage. And so there was this hotel operator who offered a vaccination package that if you go along with the children, and so they'll offer, along with the other facility, vaccination from a reputed hospital. But then they were, and it was a big advertisement in the newspaper, but then they were asked to pull it down.
Mm. And we're also in a bit of a silly situation in the UK, as Jonathan might agree, without wanting to get too political about this, but vaccines are being used as a political play.
Correct.
Which, not something obviously I would agree with, but
yeah, I know in Canada everything's still we're all locked down. There is no travel really per se, and in the States it's hit or miss depending on what state you're in, and like you said, Vicky, is really what political leaning that state is, whether you're Florida or New York or California or Texas. It's very different in terms of how they mitigate that risk, like Jonathan said, like how many deaths is too many, or what's the
I don't know if everybody else lost Greg there for a
Yeah,
moment.
I lost Greg's volume. Okay, not just me.
Oh, can you hear me now? Am I
Yes,
back?
We can hear you now,
yes.
Oh,
I
okay.
thought it was just me because everyone else seemed to be nodding.
Okay. Well, whatever
Yeah,
you
yeah.
missed, it was spectacular. It was great.
Is it-
I guess I'll go into, there's a follow-up question here. It's similar lines. It's like, how is being sustainable? How is that going to help hospitality sales in this post-pandemic era? Is there any comments on that?
Yeah, I've got some data actually. I do some work with a couple of research organisations here. One has seen that the British believe sustainable tourism is more important to them now than prior to COVID. So some have said 25% have said it's more important, 11% have said it's less important. So basically there's a sort of 14% positive swing, if you like. Some people have said they will holiday closer to home always. Some 7.9% have said they'll reduce international travel permanently, which is an interesting decision. Whether they will, whether they're just saying that at the moment, we'll wait and see. But another really interesting stat is that 45% of people said they would pay greater attention to how companies treat people. So we've become much more sensitive to people being treated well, and community issues. Again, you know, whether that was at the height of the pandemic where we were much better at looking after our neighbours, and whether that will continue once things open up and once we're able to move around more, then we'll wait and see. But the British public certainly seems to be more keen to support sustainable tourism and, you know, have those values, and therefore business will swing the way of those companies that represent that. And I think, you know, going back to what Jonathan was saying about space, you know, it's really challenging for hospitality to have only be the ones that are open, they might only be able to have 50% capacity. So from a viability standpoint, you know, do you make the decision to open and only have 50% capacity and maybe still lose money, or do you make the decision that you're still closed until you can open viably? You know, consumers are looking for traveling in more remote areas or being in places that are less busy. So they're not looking at what, you know, we've come to know as the over tourism typical destinations. They're looking away from overcrowding. They are looking more to off-season times to travel. I think it's going to really possibly, you know, change the patterns that we've historically known, and no one really knows what that will be yet.
And I have another question coming in is like, how do you ensure that sustainability is a component of resiliency or vice versa? Does anyone have any comments there?
Yeah, so, you know, I think they go hand in hand. See, resiliency primarily is that you take action today so that you are able to better prepared to face the consequences, you know, of maybe climate impacts or hazards or disaster at a later date. So they go hand in hand, and we should be able to preempt this situation and take actions, be it in terms of, you know, building more redundancy into systems, providing alternative, you know, methods that if certainly, you know, certain things pop up, suddenly we are able to kind of switch systems or switch livelihoods, or, you know, switch whatever is required for that particular place. So I think it goes hand in hand. And another very key aspect, what I realize, you know, I mean, this is true not only for the hospitality sector, but also communities in general, that the self, you know, the sufficiency and to avoid excess use, that is also very, very critical. And the art of sharing, you know, sharing, then reuse, adaptability of spaces, these are also very, very critical aspects. Just to give an example, you know, many of the say the hotel facilities in India, since they were not having any tourists, so they were converted into, you know, makeshift places for doctors to stay in, where they were, you know, staying in isolation. or makeshift, hospitals, etc. So I think going forward, the businesses should be more open to such ideas of building it. If these things are part of the design process, you're not part of the overall system, then it's much easier for us to face. So there are so many concepts that can be incorporated, which we have now also seen as makeshift. But going forward, I think they can, go hand in hand. The example which I said, adaptability or reuse, recycling, reuse of or multiple use of spaces. That's a very, very critical component of resilience and, circularity in economy. So I think, we can get into a discussion. There will be so many things that one can look into.
Okay, well, we only have, believe it or not, there's only 2 minutes left here. I'd like to share the event platform link again. It's in the description, in the chat box. It's events.trulyexpo.com.
Lost your sound again, Greg.
We lost your voice, Greg. We can't hear you.
Comments for the last couple of minutes. Any closing remarks by the panelists?
Unmute. I would reiterate really what Mili said. I don't think I would really particularly separate sustainability and resilience. They both ultimately mean being able to carry on. And maybe to some extent, we look at responsible tourism and sustainable tourism. If you like, responsible tourism is the process we undertake in order to maybe get to our sustainable tourism utopia. So responsible tourism is the journey, and sustainable tourism is the destination. And I think maybe that's also true of resilience. Resilience is the destination of the measures that we put in place to be sustainable. And really, I think that the big question really for the whole of the hospitality and tourism industry is, with regards to resilience, we know that the way we've been working and targeted in the past on KPIs, now whether that's on bed nights or whether that's the value in dollars of our tourism, or whether that is sheer volumes, numbers of people, that actually that ends up in over tourism. It doesn't end up in a quality experience, and it doesn't end up in sustainable or resilient destinations. We really need to be looking at renegotiating the targets we're working to, and whether that is happiness like Bhutan, or living standards like New Zealand, or social progress is what they use in Costa Rica, and really looking at what our KPIs are to report on sustainability and resilience rather than just purely on profitability.
Thanks, Vicky. With that, I think we're actually we're out of time, believe it or not. So I'd like to thank our panelists, Jonathan, Mili, and Vicky, and just encourage everyone to go to the event platform link at events.trulyexpo.com. And thanks everyone for attending the session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, Mili, and attendees. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank everyone. Bye.